Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Scots Whay podcast. And today I'm joined by Martin Metcalfe, who has sung with the Fornicators, the Filthy Tongues, but for very many of us, he will always be thought of as the frontman with Goodbye Mr Mackenzie, a legendary Scottish band, I'm prepared to say. Hello,
Oh,
Martin.
thanks.
We'll talk about the whole of your career, but we're going to go back to the start because there is a brand new Goodbye Mr Mackenzie album coming out. What can you tell us about that?
Well, after the surprise reunion in 2019, which was really not planned, and sort of came into being end of January, February 2019, and by as many people will know, we were selling gigs out, so it rolled on that whole year, and we decided to film some of it, and we decided to record as much of it as we could, and so the live album is largely from the Barrowland, but there are a couple of other tracks that are mixed in there that are from other venues as well. We had quite a kind of a bit of a disaster on stage sound wise at one point at the Barrowlands, and we didn't know what the hell was going on, so a couple of those songs were just a bit too wonky to put on there. There's some wonkiness in there, it's genuine, there's genuine wonkiness throughout the album, but that was a wonky too far.
What you were saying about selling out gigs, I mean, this is, from what I could see from the footage, it's a sellout Barrowland, just absolutely jumping.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it was beyond anything we could have imagined. I mean, we really thought we'd do a couple of gigs late spring and then just go back to normal kind of thing, but it just kept rolling on that year. And then, of course, the most bizarre thing happened straight afterwards, which was COVID kicked in. So we're very lucky, very lucky we managed to get that far with it all. We had to pull gigs.
Yeah,
in 2020, there were quite a lot of gigs booked in because we wanted more of it. and they've gone, as everyone will have guessed. So really hoping we can play this year.
Were you surprised at the thirst that people had to see you live again?
Oh, this is what it was like. We thought we'll do a Liquid Rooms and a Glasgow gig, and we got, we know the regular music, so we went and met regular music, our friend Mark there, and he said, okay, we'll put you on in Oranmore in Glasgow. All right, okay, well, we'll hope that goes okay, and then after a few weeks, before tickets went on sale, Mark said, fuck it, let's do the garage. And we're like, are you sure? Are you really sure we can pull that one off? You know what I mean? Because that's another 200 bodies, to fill the space. The garage is about 750 and Oranmore's about maybe 450, 500, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how we felt about it. We felt we couldn't fill the garage in Glasgow, and ended up selling out the Barrowland, which was, it was just completely wild.
Incredible that there is such a thirst for going out to see the bands that you maybe grew up with. I remember hearing Bruce Watson talking about the Skids revival gigs, and originally they were going to play a couple of gigs in Dunfermline, and they thought that might be it. And then by the time me and my brother saw them, they were at the ABC, and it was sold out.
Yeah.
So there really is that desire to go back out and see the bands that you grew up with.
Well, the Skids were particularly good live. They were, I think the word spread pretty quickly that this was really worth going to see, because with Bruce Watson and Jamie Watson being this tight blood unit that and really skillful guitarists, covering for all the parts that Stuart couldn't play, Stuart Adam, because he didn't have two bodies, you know. And obviously Richard's still being fit, really fighting fit. Sure. And many singers, by the time they get to that point, you have to, you know, wheel them in. But Richard's certainly not like that, you know. He's really fantastic in it. I mean, I'm sure there are other bands. I've not really experienced a lot of you know, heritage trail type gigs with the band at the start of this millennia, Eyes and the Filthy Tongues. We supported Killing Joke, and we were kind of surprised. They played the ABC. We were kind of surprised that they could still do that kind of level, and they were great, really great. He made such a great entrance, Jazz Coleman. We were all in the dressing room, which was right beside the stage, and we were all just chatting away. And Stacey's from America, and she didn't really know Killing Joke very well. And Jazz kind of marched past the dressing room like a robot, and his eyes were like out in stalks. He was obviously completely vibed up before he even got on the stage. There was just this entity walking past us. It was incredible.
I always thought about Jazz Coleman, that everything he did, you could feel like he meant it. He really kind of, you know, 100% it, absolutely. So you decide you're going to do the DVD documentary alongside it. When was that a decision?
We are filming, in the process of filming a full-length documentary. Right. That's kind of how it started out. But we decided that we wanted to do a short one, just to sort of, you know, journal, if you like, the progress of the first gigs to the Barrowland.
Right.
And so yeah, we made a smaller one, a smaller DVD video, but hopefully there will be a full-length documentary in the future. But that's really down to funding. So we could manage to do this small one, but there's another one cooking. The decision really was made for us by the documentary, the filmmakers, Karen Lamond and Gigi Welsh both wanted to do it. So
excellent.
It wasn't something that we planned. It's like that whole year happened to us rather than us formulating some master plan and pulling it off. It kind of evolved as it went, and Karen and Gigi were part of that evolution. So yeah, that was a great thing.
I often wonder, when you decide to do something like that, does the kind of spectre of Spinal Tap hang over the band? Just or do you embrace it? Do you just go, listen, we're a rock band, this is what we do?
I don't know. Because it's always one of these things in bands, we can't do that, it's too Spinal Tap. It's like is that an adjective? You know, it's like there's too Python-esque, you know, that kind of thing. Aye. We didn't feel like we were being Spinal Tap about it. Do you think that?
No, I don't at all. I don't at all. I just think, as you say, it's such a thing that bands obviously think about, that it probably is something that you almost kind of, a wee tick box. You say, oh, well, you know, talk about the guitar too much there, or we, you know.
In the documentary, yeah.
But no, I didn't think that at all. I just wondered if, you know, there's a fear when you go into it that, you know, you're revealing certain bits of yourself.
Well, I think it's kind of the opposite of Spinal Tap, because Spinal Tap were obviously great musicians, right? And we thought, I suppose the Spinal Tapness comes from the interaction between the people and the nonsense they talk to each other. With us, it was more like, fuck, we can't not be Spinal Tap in our playing. We've actually got to be really together, and which was reasonably tricky, because Rona, the keyboard player from the old days, from McKenzie days, hadn't touched the keyboard for 20 years. And Big John obviously has his medical condition. So John and Rona we thought, you know, this better be good, you know, we better get it right, and we better make it worthwhile. And we put such a lot of effort into rehearsal and making it sound good. And then, of course, what happened to me was I developed laryngitis on the third gig, something like that, which was a totally devastating thing. So no, we didn't think it was going to be Spinal Tap, but in a way, I suppose there are in the video and the DVD, there's a section of me speaking to the audience with this voice that doesn't work, you know, and I'm like, I've got laryngitis. So that might, I suppose you could call that slightly
I know, I
Spinal
didn't
Tap.
think that for a moment. I just thought when you start these things, it might actually what comes across in the CD and in the DVD from the footage is the warmth of people towards you, you know, the real kind of desire to sing these songs along with the band that did them in the first place. So going back to the start, how did the band come about? How did Goodbye Mr Mackenzie begin?
Several sort of reprobates from Bathgate, you know, in different bands coming through Edinburgh and, you know, setting up through here. I mean, we had our bands in Bathgate, and then we moved through, some of us moved to Edinburgh. Some of us, out of those guys, stayed in Bathgate and just commuted through for rehearsals and things. But yeah, I mean, I think I've said recently that my very first band was, I lived in a house on what was called the Glasgow Road. There's a scheme across the Glasgow Road called Windy Now. So I was in there about 200 yards away as my bass player, my drummer, because we couldn't play. We just decided you're the bass player, you're the drummer. So and then about another 200, 300 yards down the road, the bass player, the other bass, you know, but two bass players actually, right? We had Chuck Parker and Jim Kelly. Jim Kelly was the drummer. Chuck Parker was originally was the roadie, but he turned out to be a great bass player. And before that, we had a guy called Colty who lived in Fallside, which was the next scheme down, and he played bass for a while. So the four of us were just like guys knocking around. We all loved music, you know, massive love of music. We were all aged between 16 and kind of 13 at that point. I picked up a guitar when I was 15. So, and sometimes you get people in the band because they can afford to buy the equipment because they've got a job, maybe, you know, something like that. Or just, I mean, really, the foundation for that band was friendship. And then we expanded about a mile west eventually, and I met these other guys from the other school, which you'll know about coming from Scotland, that there's two types of school in every town. And we started hanging around with them, and we all loved the punk scene and the post-punk music that was coming in. And so there's probably about 8 people involved in the of Goodbye Mr Mackenzie in that town in Bathgate, you know. And then I just moved through Edinburgh, and then we picked up Shirley through here, and we picked up Rona, who's from Kinlochleven near Fort William. So we started to become almost like an international band, you know. We had a Highlander in the band, and then by the end of it, we had a Glaswegian in the band, which was Big John, and we had somebody from Dumfries, that was Finn. So we really kind of spread our wings. Yeah, I mean, it just evolved. It was never, and it was never really about who's the fanciest player, who's the slickest, funkiest bass player we can get our hands on that can do all that slapping. And it was more about what band do you like and can you play along with us, you know? So, and then we just tried to use any brain cells that we actually had to make music that sounded unique enough for us, you know, that wasn't like other people. And yeah, I think we managed to do that. Whether it's good, unique or not, that's up to the audience to decide.
Oh, I mean, I think you're an interesting band anyway, but the Edinburgh music of that time, for me, always seemed to be more influenced by punk than what was happening in Glasgow.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
Glasgow scene, and I think, there was that time where, Glasgow was almost banned from punk. Punk was almost banned from Glasgow, and you had
yeah,
to go to Paisley or Edinburgh or
yeah.
Falkirk or whatever to see a band. And I think that does come through in the music, because it seems to be yourselves and say bands that Davy Henderson was involved in or something like that. There was a punkier, kind of more arty aspect to it than maybe what was happening in Glasgow, which seemed to be more almost straightforward soul influence. Do you think that's right?
Yeah, I would have thought Glasgow was a perfect place for punk to kick off. But saying that, Manchester, the thing was, in London, it might have been hard for people dressing in an unusual manner in London, but it wasn't as hard as it would be in Manchester or Glasgow.
Yeah,
So, because people did want to, as Richard said, prosecute real violence against you if you look different. And that's why the Buzzcocks were more like just the ties, really, the sort of tight, small knotted ties, and it wasn't as extreme looking as other places. Edinburgh, I don't know. That's an image thing I'm thinking about,
yeah,
but Edinburgh maybe was a little bit more arty. I mean, although that was leveled at us, and we didn't know what anyone was talking about. That's just what we did. We didn't think about trying to be arty. We didn't think the Skids were arty. We didn't think the Scars were arty. We didn't think Susie and the Banshees were arty. But it was a sort of claim that was level. I know that none of those bands, well, Susie and the Banshees definitely don't come from Edinburgh, but that kind of post-punk arty thing was beyond our understanding as far as art goes, because we didn't have any understanding of art. We just knew we liked this strange angular sounding music, and that we weren't that keen on the second wave of punk. It
yeah,
didn't seem to have the intelligence of the first wave, like all the characters that were involved in the first wave of punk. They might have been mental, but they were quite smart guys, a lot of them. With I'm not even that they were more. I'm not saying they're more intelligent than the second wave of punk, but they seem to have a broader outlook, a world, or a more expansive outlook on life, to me. And they seem to really not care.
yeah. And interesting, just you talked about image there, and the fact that Goodbye Mr Mackenzie, you all looked like individuals to me. It all looked like you had your own style. You had, as you say, Big John in the band, yourself up front. You had all these different styles of things, rather than looking like a band whose haircuts were exact or something like that. I'm not going to go at those bands. I love some of those bands, but it seemed like a very different thing. I guess I'm trying to get around is, who did you think were your contemporaries when you were in Goodbye Mr Mackenzie?
Okay. I suppose in a way that Wyn and Davy Henderson, they were contemporary to us. They were just a little bit before us, actually, on releasing in a major way. And that, when were an attempt to storm the charts, that was a follow-on from Fire Engines, and what came out of Wyn was their love of glam rock, and I suppose more than punk. A lot of it was, seemed to be more Mark Bolan or something like that. So so proto-punks, in a way. Glam, to me, punk was homemade glam. It was DIY glam. It was attention grabbing colors and materials. And glam was trash. So punk was a natural sort of. So yeah, I think that we probably came more out of glam to punk to post-punk to the mid-80s stuff, where everything got a little bit too overproduced and you know, had to be ditched, you know, at the end of the 80s.
Yeah.
But so yeah, contemporary wise, I would say probably Win, but I mean, we quite liked the idea of Transvision Vamp. You know, it was fun,
Yeah.
fun chart stuff. It's not like we would go and, did I buy a Transvision Vamp album? No, but I enjoyed their videos and watching, and that was quite sort of glam rock.
Yeah.
That was pretty kind of, there was a bit of Mark Bolan in that too. There was no Mark Bolan in us. We were more like, you know, Love Boy and that.
I can't think of another band who would have had a former member of the Exploited and then someone who would go on to be in Garbage and yourself. And it just, you know, it was this meeting of, it was almost like the gang, you know what, in a band gets, it's like you mentioned earlier on about how the band was through friendship. And it seemed to be that way. It wasn't someone had picked someone because they fitted. It was like, no,
Yeah,
you're the kind of last gang in town and we're going to do this together.
yeah, exactly. And that actually fitted with the Sex Pistols presentation as well. They all presented as different from each other. The Clash and the Jam kind of uniformed up to some sort of level, but you know, the Pistols were individuals, and I think that punk was meant to be about individuality, and so it never crossed our minds to try and give ourselves a uniform. We just and we were called various things that weren't actually that insulting, believe it or not. Like an explosion in a cake factory was one thing we got called, or something else about the Addams family, you know, referred to as a Rock Addams family or something. You know, an Addams family is a group of individuals.
Yeah.
You know, they're all very identifiably different sort of characters, and that's what we were like.
The other thing was your sound on record. You said that things were getting more and more produced as the 80s went on and into the 90s. But to me, particularly the first album, it sounds almost like a band playing live. And I think that's why when you see the live gigs now, people relate to it so much because it sounds like the record they had in the first place.
Well, yeah, that's great. Personally, I think it could have been more live sounding, but at the time, it's just the way things had gone, I think, through the 80s and the equipment that was in front of us.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, at the point we were at our biggest, we actually sounded the biggest as well, you know, that we have ever sounded. I mean, I always sort of felt like, you know, Joy Division was some kind of meeting between the Stooges and a chamber orchestra, or, you know, because of the string sounds they had filtering through. We were really influenced by New Order and Joy Division, and I think we went down the line of synthesized strings and things like that. And, you know, it was just the way it was at the time. And I don't think we would do that today. We wouldn't probably. We were responding to technology as well as, you know, the zeitgeist of the musical, sort of the direction music was going at that point.
Yep. And of course, looking back, you would be young as well. And, you know, that's often the case where it's more difficult. I was thinking about this, looking back, going back to your debut album, 30 years. I think there's not many people that have to, or do look back on their youth in the way, you know, maybe a footballer who's being, you know, rewarded or praised many, many years later. But there's not many folk look on their young, and it's all there.
And they don't have to. They don't have to go and score goals at Olympic level, you know what I mean, or Premiership level 30 years later. Whereas we were, I mean, people just expect you to be exactly the same kind of thing, you know, until they find out you're not, you know, that you've put on a couple of stone and that kind of thing. And that, you know, with my voice going and with laryngitis, that must have been a bit of a shock. But to be fair, and I'm really grateful to the audience that they picked it up, you know, and they they took over, you know. It was really a fantastic feeling to have that support, you know.
And this is a question that kind of everyone's been asked, but as you say, end of 2019 and then 2020, almost straight away, you were into COVID and lockdown and everything. How has it been for you? Have you been able to plan anything, or has been looking after the CD been a help? I mean, how's it been?
Oh, a help. Well, work just carried on, you know, and people tend to think that this is a hobby, and it's a lot of work, you know. I mixed the album, you know. I took a lot longer than I thought it was going to. I mean, people think, I used to look at live albums, and I used to at the bottom it said produced by. I'm like, it's a live album. How do you need a producer in a live album? But it's not the same as a bootleg. You know, there's work goes into getting it right and the atmosphere right and all that sort of thing. You know, so that was a lot of work for me. Finishing the edit was a lot of work for Gigi, because she's from America, so she's over there now, and she did all the edits over there. And at the same time we were writing as well, trying to write new material. So we put out a couple of, I know this is Goodbye Mr Mackenzie, but we put out a couple of Filthy Tongues songs written in lockdown. During that period, we put them out just digitally, and so we actually released material through lockdown, you know, new material. And I'm working on Filthy Tongues stuff still. We're really hoping to have a Filthy Tongues album out this year.
Excellent.
And hopefully a Goodbye Mr Mackenzie album. Maybe not this year, but we'll try, you know, we'll do our best to get that one out as well. So yeah, no, lockdown's not been, I think lockdown's a little bit easier for creatives than it is for people who clock in and do their job, you know. But saying that, creatives can be lazy bastards, and getting motivated on your own in the house, especially when there are other people around to disturb you. I mean, I can be in the middle of writing a song, and then the door will open, and it's like, can you help me with the dog? You know, that kind of stuff. So, and the muse just flies away out the window, you know. I'm just like, what was I writing about there? So, yeah.
And you had, as you say, plans to tour more into 2020. Have they been kind of pushed over to 2021, or can you not do that yet?
Yeah. And again, dates have been moved since then, because it's just gone on longer than anyone could have imagined, I think. I mean, you could have imagined that, if you look back at the Spanish flu, you know, it was a 2-year cycle then. But I suppose everyone naturally assumes that we're living in this amazing technological age now, that things can be snapped up like that. You know, we can get a vaccine, no problem. And then you find out that you've got how many billions of people to give a vaccine to around the world before this is contained. So yeah, there's been a lot of shocks and a lot of disappointments throughout this stuff, but there's also been good stuff, you know. I've written lyrics about hating fresh air, and I've been kind of forced to kind of enjoy a bit of nature, which is not, my dad was a coal miner, and I think I inherited that need for darkness. No. And maybe hatred of daylight, perhaps. Maybe that's the alcoholic in me. Can't stand the daylight, you know. But yeah.
So yeah, but you must be delighted about not just the reaction to the gigs you did, but also the excitement about the CD coming out and the fact that people are keen for more Goodbye Mr Mackenzie.
Yeah, but I mean, it's exciting, but at the same time, it feels like a little bit of a responsibility, you know, because people have had such a hard time that it's like we've got to come up with something that's gonna pick people's spirits up in our own miserable sort of way of.
It's funny you say that. I never thought of you as a miserable band, but
Well, the subject matter, perhaps. Yeah, the
perhaps
performances are miserable.
Yeah.
Although I'm not one for smiling a lot. If I could afford David Bowie's teeth, I'd maybe smile more. I lost one here right at the start of lockdown. I still haven't had it replaced. Like a chip came off it. It was a tooth. When I was 15, I'd put new strings on my guitar, and I thought, I need to get rid of all these flapping bits of metal, okay? And then being 15 and the brain not being fully developed, the frontal lobe, I think it is, I tried to bite this metal string, you know, the end of the metal string. And all that happened was like a dent went into my tooth. And that dent was there until last March, where it's now the source of an eruption of enamel and whatever that just it bounced out my face, you know. So and I did go in and get it fixed, but it came out again. So and now we're locked down. I can't go and get it fixed. So anyway, yeah, I would smile more if I had David Bowie's titanium teeth. They were like $8,000 per tooth or something like that. It was.
Works of art themselves. People say rock and roll is a glamorous business, but there you are, biting the end off your own strings. Listen, Martin, thank you so much for talking to you today. It's been an absolute pleasure to do so.
Cheers, Alistair. Thanks a lot.
No bother. And we'll be back soon with someone completely different.